So let's talk about some diseases of bone and diseases of joints. Now, bursitis, quite common. It's an inflammation of a bursa. It can be caused by a blow or friction. Can be caused by overuse or excessive forces, such as trying to lift too heavy a thing or too heavy a things repeatedly. Tendinitis, kind of the same thing. It's just an inflammation of the tendon sheaths as opposed to the bursa. And then we'll talk also about arthritis, which is an inflammatory or degenerative disease of joints, and there are over 100 different types, but there are just a few that seem to impact us most. This is one of the most widespread and crippling diseases in the United States, and it comes in basically three major types. The first two you see here, osteoarthritis, which is the most common chronic arthritis. Now, they call this related to the normal aging process. It is a wear and tear condition, but if you are overweight, if you overuse a joint, if you do stuff that puts a lot of force on a joint, you're more likely to develop this osteoarthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis, on the other hand, is an autoimmune disease. We'll talk more about autoimmune diseases when we get into the immune system, but essentially what happens is that the immune system doesn't recognize part of your body as belonging to you anymore, and so it ends up going in and attacking the joint. A couple of different things that can trigger this. You can have a viral disease which actually ends up putting markers on tissues that the body doesn't recognize and will end up going in and destroying it maybe after you've completed or are done with the disease. Again, we'll talk more about autoimmune diseases as a whole in the immune system, but be aware that rheumatoid arthritis is autoimmune. Osteoarthritis is usually unilateral. You have one joint on one side or several joints on one side that cause you problems. Rheumatoid arthritis is bilateral, and you can have both hips hurt or the fingers and joints on both hands. And this can often lead to deformities such as this. And what happens is that the cartilage gets destroyed, you get kind of bone against bone, and the bones actually will fuse if you don't keep moving them. And they can get into some fairly distorted conditions. So this bone and that bone have fused to become one bone, as has this one and this one, the distortions here. So this is a condition that happens as we age, more likely to occur if we're older, but it can happen in the very young. It's just that as we get older, our immune system becomes a little less efficient, and it can begin to attack our own cells. Gouty arthritis is basically a lifestyle kind of issue. We get inflammation of joints caused by deposition of uric acid crystals from the blood. Now, uric acid is a breakdown product of proteins. So if you have a high protein diet, you can have higher uric acid levels. It used to be known as sort of a royal disease because people who drink lots of red wines, eat lots of cheeses and meats will get this, and that was the diet of royalty. Royalty did not eat vegetables because it came from the earth. So this is one of many conditions that are known as royal diseases. We see this a lot in the United States. We are pretty much a red meat kind of country where people like to have a meat with every meal. Big cheeseburgers and stuff like that. This can be controlled with diet. Basically, you reduce your protein, eliminate the red wines, cut down on the cheeses. So basically, you take out everything that makes life worth living. There may be some genetic component that makes people more susceptible, as in the ability to process this uric acid. Uh, well, men have a higher tendency to get this, both because we tend to eat a higher meat content in our diet and because this genetic characteristic seems to be more prominent in men. We've already talked about some disorders of curvature, so I'm not going to talk about these other than to, again, give you a reminder. Scoliosis is a lateral curvature. Kyphosis is a curvature in the thoracic area. Lordosis in the lumbar region. And again, you can see lateral curvature in scoliosis, you can see lumbar curve in lordosis, and you can see this exaggerated thoracic curve in kyphosis. A major condition that particularly impacts women is osteoporosis, and this is a bone thinning disease that affects half of the women over the age of 65. That is, half of the women over the age of 65 have some symptoms. It will impact any woman to a certain extent after menopause. The reason for that is that estrogen helps maintain bone density and bone mass. And when you remove estrogen, the activity of osteoblasts diminishes, whereas the activity of osteoclasts remains the same. Now, it also happens in men, about 20% of the men over the age of 70, because testosterone levels drop as well. But we don't have the precipitous drop-off that women do. Women, have menopause between 40 and 50 years old. The testosterone levels in men drops off, so maybe about the age of 60, we have reduced levels. This is also one of the reasons why men kind of mellow out when they hit their 60s. But the problem here is that men have more bone mass, and so we have a lot more to lose, and women have considerably less. Women also start losing the bone mass earlier on, and that's why it impacts women as much as it does. Women live longer. In general, women live to be in their mid to late 70s. Men die in their early 70s. So for men, this isn't such a problem because by the time it's going to impact us, we're dead. Still, for the women, what can happen? The disease makes bones fragile. Bones can be easily fractured. So a fall can result in a broken hip, as an example. And a broken hip can result in all sorts of complications. I've known a person who died basically because they broke their hip. No one was around, and they laid on the floor for a couple of hours before they were discovered. And by that time, they were in such a shape that they developed an embolism. So, more visible symptoms. Vertebral collapse. You get this kyphosis, also known as the dowager's hump. And estrogen supplementation can be used. It aids in health and normal density of the female skeleton. It helps maintain the secondary sexual characteristics. The problem with taking estrogen supplementation is that estrogen also promotes the growth of breast cancers. So if you have a family history of breast cancer, this is an approach that you may not be able to take. There are some things that you can do to increase bone density. Physical exercise will do that. Eating properly will do that. Making sure that you have appropriate calcium levels. Not drinking colas will help you maintain calcium levels. Not being particularly underweight will help you. In fact, here are some of the risk factors for osteoporosis. A low calcium intake. So people who don't like to drink milk or eat cheeses, they are somewhat at risk. Now, The advertisements for Tums tell you that it has calcium, something your body needs, but that's actually not bioavailable. It's really hard to absorb the calcium in Tums. So different stuff that is in food stuffs will be the best benefit for you. Tobacco users. A reason that this is a risk is that tobacco really does cut down on peripheral circulation in the blood. It cuts down on the oxygen content, and it can result in a more rapid breakdown of bone. Eating disorders, of course. If you are bulimic or anorexic, you're not getting the stuff that you need. A sedentary lifestyle, because bone mass increases with physical activity. Excessive alcohol consumption comes into play, largely because it impacts your diet and increases that sedentary lifestyle. If you are very thin, that is, you have body mass index less than 19, you are more likely to develop osteoporosis. Now, the reason that this occurs, very thin women don't have periods. What it is estrogen is a fat-soluble hormone. And in the absence of much body fat, you don't have enough estrogen to go through your normal reproductive cycle. Estrogen maintains the function of bone. There are corticosteroid medications which also come into play. So if you were on or taking some steroids for some condition, say you had a transplant, then you might become a little more susceptible to osteoporosis. There are some risk factors that you can't change. Being a woman, getting older, those you cannot change. Race. You're at a greater risk of osteoporosis if you are of white or Asian descent. Family history. If there is a history of osteoporosis in your family, then you are more likely to develop it. Frame size. Women who are exceptionally petite and thin, they're going to have less bone mass to lose. Hyperthyroidism. If you are hyperthyroid, you are more likely to develop this condition. And a number of other medical conditions and procedures that can affect bone health. But those are things that you can't change. I would say that if you do have a thyroid disease, that can be treated, and you should make sure that you treat it or get it treated appropriately. Now, here are what the changes look like. On the left here, you see bone that has osteoporosis, and you can see how these little trabeculi have thinned down, look just eaten up and chewed up. This, on the other hand, is healthy, non-osteoporotic bone. You have much thicker trabeculi. In a female, this is the type of change that you can see. It accelerates rapidly after the age of 40, so you can be tall and have absolutely great muscle tone, but once you have lost your estrogen, you are going to start kind of compressing the bone, changing body shape over time. By the age of 70, you can become quite stooped. So just something to be aware of, particularly for the females here. Take care of yourself. Make sure that you eat appropriately. Make sure that you get an appropriate amount of exercise. Make sure that you get the calcium. If you can, quit smoking, or at least cut down on it. And if possible, this one's probably the hardest one, is to stop drinking colas. Love the colas myself, and the good news is that this does not affect men, but it does affect the bone levels in women. So hopefully this has been helpful and informative, and thank you much.